All right. Good afternoon, good morning, wherever you are today, and welcome. I'm really excited to have you here with us today. My name is Dr. Megan Pollock, and we are going to be talking about human-centered leadership today on our panel. I have with me today Shaunna Black and Dr. Gustina Hawkins, and I want to tell you a little bit about them. So I want to first say that I know them both personally from my professional career. I'll start with Gustina. Dr. Gustina Collins-Hawkins. She is a certified Six Sigma Green Belt and accomplished electrical engineer, and she brings expertise in new product development and quality management within the semiconductor industry. She is known for her results-driven leadership, technical excellence, and dedication to fostering innovation and improvement. And Gustina and I worked in parallel in different groups in my early days as an engineer for Texas Instruments. And I'm really glad to reconnect with you and have you here with us today, Gustina.
Yes,
Next, I
thank you
want
for
to,
having me.
yeah. Next, I want to introduce Shaunna. Now, Shaunna is someone I also met in my baby engineer days, but she's never gotten rid of me. She's been in my life for about 20 years, and she is today an executive coach and an experienced tech leader with over 26 years in Fortune 500 and mid-cap companies, including being fab manager for both TI and another company that she may tell you about. And she is passionate about empowering heart-centered leaders, and she specializes in strategy, culture design, and elevating women in tech into impactful roles. And so, to both of you, I'm really thrilled that you're here to join me today.
Thank you for having us.
So I also want to thank the Bossier Parish Community College Center for Teaching and Learning, both Monica Lawrence and Dana Spires, who are the sort of sponsors of this event. And my name is Megan Pollock, and I am the founder of Engineered Orgs or Engineer Inclusion, and will be your host and guide for the conversation today. What to expect? We're going to have a little bit of an introduction here. I've got some questions already set to have conversation with the panelists, and then we're going to save time for some audience questions. And then we'll have just at the very end some closing and next steps at heart. Even though I am an engineer, I am also an educator. And so I want to make sure we spend a little bit of time reflecting and thinking about how we can apply the learnings from today. And then we'll end at the hour. Now, this first question that I have, I'm going to ask both of our panelists to respond to the question. And that question is, what does human-centered leadership mean to you? And how has it shaped your leadership style?
Sure. Okay. I guess for me, human-centered leadership means, I guess, a focus on the individual, the person, and not necessarily focusing on metrics. So you're more thinking about, I guess, authenticity. So that to me, human-centered leadership is all about being an authentic person and focusing on not only getting the job done, but also the people that are doing the job.
Yeah, so I'll answer it from a leadership perspective. And I think I started using the language heart-centered leadership in 2018 because I realized that we still don't use the word heart at work. And to me, leadership is all about serving people. It's all about using your power for and with people. Leadership is personal and relational. And I think particularly in, for example, a manufacturing organization, it's about the people. It's not about metrics are a way of measuring how we're performing together, but it's really about the people who produce the results. And heart-centered organizations really focus on growing people, creating safety for people to bring their best selves to work. And it creates an environment where people can take risks to grow, risk to fail, and we support each other. It's really, for me, it's about creating a nurturing garden where people can blossom. I think I've worked in many deserts in my life. And, people to me are like beautiful flowers. You put them in nurturing ground and they can blossom into their full potential. You put those same people in a desert, you never see that potential. For me as a leader, revenue growth, market share, shipping outputs, that's always just been a byproduct of a great human-centered organization where people can flourish.
So some commonality between your answers. So Gustina, you talked about authenticity, and Shaunna, you talked about a place where people can be their best selves. Like these are the same concepts, right? Our best self is when we get to show up as our most authentic self.
They
So
are.
so Shaunna, tell me a little bit about an example of a time when
Mhm.
prioritizing people over processes led to better outcomes.
Okay, so and I'll try and make it really quick because I want us to ask a lot of questions. But I spent my career basically being assigned to turn around organizations. So I actually had spent over half of my career in different places than manufacturing. I supported manufacturing, ran global divisions, but I did not grow up in manufacturing. And in TI where I first became a fab manager, all my colleagues, my peers had all grown up in manufacturing. And we had a wafer fab that was supposed to be making $1.5 billion a year and was losing $650 million a year. And I was the third factory manager assigned to turn it around. And my two predecessors got retired from TI because of failure to do that. And the entire company knew this wafer fab was the worst factory in TI and called 1,500 people that were in this factory losers. My predecessors all came out of huge backgrounds in manufacturing processes, process engineering, wafer fab processing, process yield, cycle time, productivity, profitability, and they had not turned this factory around. So I went into the factory assuming that 1,500 people wanted to be successful. And they showed up to be successful every day. And they wanted to work successfully as a team. And they wanted to go home as successful people to their families and contribute to their community. So I assumed that there was something wrong inside the factory that created barriers for them being able to do that. And so I went into this factory not having manufacturing expertise, but I knew how to create a nurturing garden. And that's what I focused on. And we were able to turn that factory around. On the way, we used all the tools. We used process yield. We used cycle time. We used productivity metrics. We used cost per wafer metrics. But those were just metrics of outcome. It was not what caused that factory to turn around. And within 3 years, we were out the bottom quartile. Within 5 years, we were in the middle of the pack worldwide. And we focused on creating a nurturing garden. So that's how I feel about metrics.
So Shaunna, adding a little bit, more context here, what's an example of how you helped those people feel seen and to be more valuable than the metrics that were driving the output?
Okay, so I went into that factory and did something really radical that had never been done before. The SVP of Global Manufacturing gave me 18 months to show significant progress, or they were going to shut that factory and affect 1,500 people. So I assume that leadership has a lot to do with a nurturing garden. So on the day I was announced, I announced to the entire organization that all people in supervision were basically on notice, that they were acting, and that we had 30 days to decide who we were going to keep in supervision, because I assumed that they were the climate makers. And so what I invited the people to do was tell me who to keep. I didn't tell them who to get rid of. I told them I could figure that out. I said, tell me who to keep. Who serves you? Who supports you and helps you grow? Who removes barriers? Who is accountable as a leader? Who cares about you? And then we spent the next 30 days with roundtables, focus groups, answering lines, anonymous answering lines, answering boxes, and people told me who to keep. And in that 30 days, I think people started believing that maybe we were really going to listen to them and change the culture. And within 30 days, we removed 17 people out of the top 50 supervisors. We didn't fire them. We relocated them to other jobs in TI and gave them an opportunity to find jobs. But we promoted the people who had been caring about the people all along. And together, we built that organization back.
Thanks for that detail, Shaunna. So what I hear in that is one is that you went to the sort of ground level, right? You didn't just use that top-down management and leadership style. You went to people and said, I care about you. I want to know who else cares about you.
Right.
And we're going to listen to you.
Right.
And these are really big differences in how we, create processes. So often we create structures to hear what people are saying, but are we really listening? And
Right.
so again, this is a key tenet of human.
And what had happened in the midst of that failure, it had become a desert. It had become a bully culture. Everybody was afraid, even supervision. And so everybody was blaming everybody. And it was a really toxic environment. And we had to start with leadership. And again, you have to hold people accountable for how they choose to behave. And that's what we did.
Thanks, Shaunna. Now, Gustina, I want to direct the next question to you. And that is, can you share a key learning moment or a mistake that shaped your leadership journey?
Yes, I definitely have probably more than one, but one in particular that was, I guess, a sticking point for me was when I went into an evaluation with my manager, and she says, "Oh, I don't understand, your impact. I don't know what you're doing, and I don't think you're putting enough, you know, passion into your work because I'm not seeing it." And so, for me, that was realizing at that point because I was a hard worker and I was getting positive feedback from other people on the team. But I was kind of making the assumption that my work would speak for itself, that she would see that, oh, these other people are thinking and saying great things about me. And so that would be enough. And so, one of the things, the sticking point for me in that situation was actually starting to communicate, to my manager what I was doing instead of just saying, oh, my work is going to speak for myself. She's going to see that I did this, this, and this. But I actually had to communicate those things out, write them down, send them to her in the email or tell her the specific things that I was doing um, within my work that were having an impact. So I would say a key learning takeaway from that would be to make sure that you toot your own horn every now and again. You work hard, we all get busy, but just taking time to make sure that people know what we're doing and the impact that it has.
So I'm finding myself going into defensive mode for you, Gustina, because what I hear in that is an environment that was not set up to make you thrive, that it made you have to change in order to fit the sort of shape of that space. Now, learning to communicate is always a really important and valuable skill. However, to go back to sort of Shaunna's example of the sort of garden versus the desert, when we create a garden kind of environment, if perhaps the leaders that you had been working with were also creating that kind of environment, it wouldn't have forced you to have to change and to adapt to a different kind of space. And so I just want to make sure for
Okay, but I'm going
okay,
to add something to
please
Gustina.
do.
I am
Yeah.
because the leaders that ended up in that first 60 days retaining, we gave it an open thing. Tell us about your supervisors. So we went way down. And what we found is many of these people were doing amazing jobs, and the previous management didn't see them either. Because people who tend to be heart-centered leaders or human-centered leaders, they're not out self-promoting. they're out serving people. They're taking care of people. They're removing barriers. They're getting the job done. They're feeling pride that Gustina is feeling. And I think that, um, I agree that we all need to, I agree with Gustina, what she said. We are all responsible for making sure that people know what we're contributing. And women tend to do that less than men. I'll tell you, as a woman leader, men tell me all the time what they've achieved, what they've accomplished, how great they're doing. Women do not blow their horn the way that we need to. And I totally agree with Gustina about that. But I also think that leaders out there who are really caring and serving others tend to be really humble about it. And so there has to be something in the system that allows us to celebrate the best. And that was the second thing we changed in the organization. Every quarter, we continued that process of letting people in the organization recognize people who were doing a good job, because frequently your best people are not out self-promoting. So I'm with you, Gustina. Yes, you're
I
right.
think we're saying the same thing,
We
right?
are,
Like,
we are, we
Mhm.
are, we are. But I do think that's a characteristic sometimes of heart-centered people, is they're humble. It's one of the
Yes,
characteristics.
definitely.
yeah, and so for people who are in any kind of leadership position, for someone to come and say you lack passion, oh, that broke my
Oh
heart.
yes, no,
Can't
no,
believe that someone said that, right?
that's a terrible leader.
So
That's a
my
terrible
question is like,
leader.
don't be my point is like, don't be that person, right?
Yes,
Like
exactly.
Mhm.
they're the one that's creating the barriers to your success. And
Well,
so
and that feedback was about the person, not about the behavior. That's terrible feedback.
Um, so I want us to talk just briefly about a part of question 4 here. Manufacturing, which is the sort of focus of this year's Women in STEM series, we often know it emphasizes efficiency and output. Now, both of you have already talked a little bit about this, but how do you balance these demands with fostering a people-centered, a heart-centered, human-centered culture?
Well, I love accountability. I think that accountability has been very badly used by management. Um, People, it's got a bad name because people use accountability to blame. That is not accountable behavior, right? I don't know if any of you can Google this, but there's a great tool called the accountability ladder, and it was introduced to me in the 90s. But accountability is really that capability to perform and get the life you want. And, if you've ever been on a sports team or a band team or any type of team, we all have metrics, because metrics are goals and metrics are a way of getting better and better together. So, so metric is really about aiming, accountability is really about saying, okay, we have this vision, like in this case, we have this vision to be a great great factory. Here are the metrics we're aiming to, right? And accountability is really about us making a plan, taking action, running into a barrier, making a new plan, taking more action, running into another barrier, taking more action, more steps. And you until you arrive, you're not off the hook. And metrics are a way of just knowing that you're on the journey. The key is to understand that it's just a tool. It's not the outcome. It's the tool. It's a tool for excellence. And, blaming or waiting and hoping somebody else fixes it, or, feeling like a failure then when you have a risk and something doesn't work out, feeling badly about that, that's not accountable behavior. Accountable behavior is knowing that I'm capable of taking a new step, making a new decision, overcoming any obstacle, and we do it together. We do it together. It's climbing that mountain together, and blaming each other or waiting for somebody else to fix it or making excuses. That doesn't help us get to the top. and we do it together. And so I love accountability from that perspective, because we're just lifting each other up the mountain and we're traveling together, right?
Yeah, thanks, Shauna. So Gustina, I would ask you this. So I remember in my experience as an engineer, I sort of jokingly always say, like, my job was to make products that were better, faster, cheaper, smaller, right? And Gustina, you spent your career in many ways in product development and quality management. And so what's something that you've seen in your experience, again, this sort of tension between efficiency and output and the reality of like people are the people who's driving the output?
Yeah, I mean, I guess as far as looking at balancing, I mean, I know, we have tools that are available to help with this efficiency and output, but sometimes those tools get in the way of what works for us as people. I mean, I've seen several examples of, having a database where you have to go and enter information. And it's like, well, if you have to enter it manually, then, one person is not going to enter the same type of information as a second person. So, I'm encountering that a lot, especially as a person who works in quality who is pulling information from that same database, trying to figure out, hey, what's really going on here. So I think, part of the job that I'm working now is in quality is actually trying to find ways to help improve those systems. And by, and as Shauna said, just making it a team effort. So, oftentimes we have these tools and we put them out there and we say use them, but how do you get the people to really embrace the tool as, something to help make things easier and not just something that's added to their job as a requirement. So,
I guess, Sina, you're making a connection here to a conversation we had in the Women in STEM panel last year on design and the importance of like user-centered design in the same way that we create organizations. I think one of the most common things that we think about in user-centered design is Apple, right? Like they became who they are because they designed devices for people and they looked at how they're going to use them and what they're going to use them for. And so often the structures in our organizations and our manufacturer, fabs and whatnot, they're not always designed with the user, meaning the employees, the people in mind, and they do become barriers to often that efficiency. Yeah. So thanks for that connection. Now, question 5, this connects back to what Shauna was saying around accountability. So I just want to see if there's anything else we want to add to the conversation on accountability, and specifically, how do we model it for our teams? How do we model accountability for our teams?
Well, I'll go back to the accountability ladder. So almost every organization I've been assigned to in my life was a turnaround organization. And one of the things I realize is we learn accountability in our family of origin. So when you come into an organization, there's a natural bell-shaped curve about how people understand and experience accountability. My background is also teaching. I started out in teaching. So, when we come in, we start talking about what's accountability, what does it look like, and we make agreements about how we're going to do accountability and how do we talk to each other and how do we grow our accountability. So it's really about learning to recognize behavior in ourselves and each other, right? And so one of the things I love about the accountability scale or just the process is I've used it for so long now that somebody can come into my office or even when I'm coaching now and around a particular topic, I can just listen to them talk for 2 or 3 minutes and I know pretty much where they are on the accountability scale, right? And low accountability really means I don't feel empowered to fix this. I either feel like a victim or I feel like I've been blamed for it, or I feel like I have to, wait and hope for somebody else to fix it for me. And what I found is as long as I always see the capability in that person, I can ask questions in a way that they can discover the next step they can take for themselves, because there's always another step, right? And it's really about us reminding each other that there's always a next choice, there's always a next step, there's always a next answer. And the only warning thing I would tell you is if you start running your organization that way, you know, the fair warning is people will hold you accountable too. So if you come in as a leader and you've had a bad day, and you start off by, looking for somebody to blame because something went wrong, somebody's going to call you on it. Or if you raise your kids doing that, my adult kids will say to me, "Well, Mom, that sounds a little blameful. Don't you have a better solution?" Right? And so I think that's what a really healthy organization does together. They help, we all help each other be our best self by being there in a supporting way and reminding each other, you've got this. You've got the talent, the capability, the wherewithal to sit with us and figure it out. Let's figure it out together. There's nothing we can't overcome with some creativity and some teamwork and asking for resources or asking for what you need in order to be successful. To me, that's what accountability is. But that's not how we see it utilized by a lot of managers.
Yeah, so Shaunna, I just did a quick search and dropped this in the slides. I'm not sure if this is the same ladder that you're referring to, but it is at least some version of an accountability ladder for our audience.
Good.
Curious about that.
Yeah, I appreciate it.
So my next question is focused on the environment. And again, we've already heard from both of you a little bit about this. And I know, Shaunna, this is something that you're really passionate about. So how do we work to create an environment, a beautiful garden, not a desert, where our team members, they feel heard, valued, and empowered? And so what are some specific strategies or tools that have been most effective for you?
Well, I think it starts with what's your belief system about people, right? Um, I was raised with a belief system that we are all uniquely and beautifully made. We all bring to the team or to our organization or to our family or community unique talents, gifts, strengths, competencies, backgrounds, perspectives, um, experiences that are unique. I believe that there's another Shaunna Black on the planet, right? Or the universe, unless we're talking the metaverse. Maybe I've got a parallel Shaunna working out there. And so I bring something really special to every team I'm in. I create the system I'm part of. I contribute to that system because of who I am. And so does everybody else there, right? And so I really believe, I have this belief that people want to be successful and they want to be part of a successful team and they want to be part of a successful family and they want to be part of a successful community. And if they're not, there's barriers in the way. Now, some of those barriers, a lot of those barriers are in the system, frankly. A lot of workplaces have a lot of work, there's plenty of barriers in education, in schools, at universities, in companies. There's plenty of barriers to people being their best selves. Second of all, there's barriers within us. I've had, like Gustina was talking about, we don't have enough time to talk about the failures I've had in my career. I mean, big failures. But I was blessed with many leaders in my career who were able to see past the failure and see my unique beauty and chose to coach me and teach me and pull that out of me and continue to take risk on me, right? So there's two pieces. And I think our job as leaders is to remove those barriers so people can show up. And we keep having the same thing. What are we doing to create a place where people can be their best selves? I think safety in the workplace is a great place to start. People should be able to show up, as you started it, Megan, at the beginning, being there. And Gustina says the same thing. We want to we want to work at a place where we are invited to show up our full selves. And we can bring our family to work. You know, we don't have to leave stuff outside the door. I don't have to leave my family outside the door. I don't have to leave my concerns about a sick child outside the door. I don't have to, you know, leave my concerns about an ill family member outside the door. I don't have to bring, you know, leave my sexuality outside my door, my ethnicity, all of that. It's all welcomed inside the door. And that, I think that's the first place to start.
Yeah, one of the things that I like to help people think about is that authenticity is a function of privilege.
Mm-hmm.
Unless you are in an environment with leaders and people who care about creating an environment where those barriers to showing up as yourself are removed. And so to me, to be a human-centered leader, to be a heart-centered leader, to be a people-centered leader, whatever way that you want to call it, is about recognizing the humanity and the beautiful diversity of people that we have, and recognizing how do we reduce, eliminate, and dismantle the barriers to people being able to show up as their full authentic selves.
Yeah, I think I keep going back to my experience, you know, growing up. But I was an athlete and I worked in team, you know, played on teams. The best teams I ever worked, you know, ever played on, our relationship was very personal. We knew what was going on in each other's lives. We knew who each other's what we knew their parents, we knew their families, we knew when they were struggling at school. We just we just knew each other, right? And because we knew each other, we could trust each other. And that trust led to high performance. I don't think work and school and university is any different.
Yeah. So my next question is about your personal growth. And so Gustina, maybe you want to take the lead on this one. How has embracing a human-centered approach contributed to your personal growth as a leader and maybe even as a human?
I would say for in regards to like personal growth, and I guess it goes back again to the level of authenticity and knowing, you know, what you want, um, you know, as far as becoming a leader, knowing that, hey, this is the path that I want to take. So, part of I guess my path in being, you know, or growing as a leader is realizing that it's not something that I'm doing on my own, that it's more you know, as Shaunna was just talking about working with a team that, you know, that has removed barriers because you've made personal connections with your team members, and that allows you all to foster the things that not only the things that help you in your role, but also things that help you to bridge the gap between, you know, or maybe not a gap, but to help to balance out, you know, your work versus personal life, you know, that sort of a thing. So
Yeah, thanks, Gustina. Shauna, anything you want to add?
Yeah, I think it's because of how I think about leadership. You know, I think it's personal and relational. I've worked for plenty of leaders who thought it was directive and transactional. So I don't think that this, what I'm about to say, really applies to that style of leadership. But if you believe leadership is personal and relational, then I'll tell you that being that kind of leader is hugely vulnerable because one of the things I've come to realize in my life that is that in my life, the two people who know me sometimes better than I know myself is my family and the people who work with me, because they see my behavior every day of every moment. And they can see things frequently in me that I can't see myself because I have blind spots. I have, you know, biases. I have, you know, unconscious behavior. I can be, you know, impatient and not realize I'm being impatient. They see all that stuff. And when you're working, as Gustina said, in high trust teams, they'll hold you accountable. And you don't get to hide from your stuff. And I have a lot of stuff. You know, I'm a really wonderful human being and I have a lot of stuff. I have blind spots. I have, you know, and you just don't get to hide out from those when you're choosing to be a leader in a relational approach. People will tell you when you're not being your best self today because they know what your best self looks like. And you get to practice a lot of self-awareness and you get to deal with knowing you're not living up to your best self and having to grow into that. And it takes a lot of humility and a lot of willingness to deal with feedback. And it's not always easy.
Thank you so much. So I want to skip to our final question. I skipped a question. We can come back to it if we have time. But I want to make sure that we answer this and then open the floor to the audience for questions. So if you haven't contributed any questions to the Slido poll, I encourage you to do that and then you can upvote them. I'm not seeing any. Oh, I do see some questions there. So you can upvote those questions and then we'll start working through those. But before we get to the audience questions, Gustina, why don't you start us off with some advice that you would give someone starting or looking to advance their leadership journey?
Well, I guess I would have to start by piggybacking off of what Shaunna just was talking about in regards to it being a relational journey. So, you know, making sure that, you know, in your um, seeking to become a leader, a better leader, that it requires building those relationships with people who can get to know you on a personal as well as professional basis so that they can see your blind spots so that they can let you know, hey, you know, this may be an area that you need to grow in. And then, you know, and I would say the main thing with building relations is to keep in mind that just because you want to be a leader and you're exemplifying leadership characteristics doesn't necessarily connect with other people. So making sure that you speak out, you know, the fact that you want to become a leader, I think is also very important. So
Great. Thanks, Gustina. Shaunna, what do you think? What's some advice you want to share?
So I think women are really great leaders. And this style of leadership we're talking about is not the dominant model in the world today. The dominant model of leadership in the world today is still command and control, top-down, directive, and transactional. And I think it's even more today than even 10 years ago, right?
Or 2 weeks ago.
Well, you said that. I didn't say that. So, but you know, I started as an entry level engineer in '85, and that was the style of leadership then. But like I said, I came from a family that believed leading was serving. I had taught high school for 5 years before that. I had worked on teams. That style didn't fit me. And I think I was old enough at that point that I was too old to change. And so I just started doing it my way because that's just what felt normal to me. And guess what? It got results. And I was low enough in the organization, people didn't even care how I led, right? By the time about 5 years into TI, when I started getting multi-million dollar projects, people started questioning, can that really work? Because it wasn't the dominant style. And I was fortunate to have a leader who really believed in servant leadership. And he said, Shaunna, just keep doing it your way. He gave me permission, right? And backed me and supported me. And what I'll tell you is I think that women do this naturally because we're raised to be relational. I mean, this might be my own bias, but I think society sort of expects us to be more relational than men sometimes. And and I think leading teams is very relational. And we don't have enough women choosing to come into manufacturing and lead these teams. And it's a wonderful experience. It's just a wonderful experience. I've always said that, leading groups, well, especially leading factories, it's like being a mayor of a small town. Everything you can imagine that could happen in a small town is happening in your factory, right? And I think that women are really great relationship builders. And it's a fundamental talent and skill required to lead people. And I want to encourage women to think about serving others, because that's what leading is doing. And we do it anyway. We do it in our families, we do it in our schools. We need more women. We need more women in manufacturing. We need more women in technology. And by the way, the compensation is great, the security is great. We're bringing manufacturing back to the US in record numbers. It's a career where people literally go into it like Gustina and I and stay 20 and 25 years doing it. And you can always find another job in another company. I mean, there's just not enough experts in this field today, and women really flourish in this field. And I just really encourage women to think about it. And I'm going to tell you one more thing. Put this in your note. Read a book, Women Don't Ask by Cheever and Babcock. It will open your mind about asking for what you want.
I think Shauna recommended that book to me in one of our very first mentoring sessions, and we
Yeah.
read it and
It's
discussed
been
it.
it's been around a while, but unfortunately we still need to use it because things have not changed enough.
So I want to give people a last minute chance to sort of upvote their question and make a connection. And one of the things I heard in Shauna's description there is, yes, women we're sort of gendered to be more relational leaders. And the sort of flip side of that is there's an opportunity for men to take on those qualities as well. And that when there is tons of leadership that research that talks about when leadership uses a more people-centered, heart-centered, servant-centered kind of leadership, that it drives better outcomes.
It
When we
does,
when we
absolutely.
when we create environments where people feel valued, seen, heard, it creates psychological safety, which again is driving better outcomes. So this is a kind of leadership that we want everyone to espouse. Okay, so our first question here that's at the top of the screen, looks like it's initially directed to Shauna, is what's a strategy to, quote, hold the person accountable for their behavior when it's the most senior leader, and then cascades down?
I think the first thing is you have to see the beauty in that person. You have to start with that belief that that person is a unique, beautiful human being. And then you have to, with love, give feedback about the behavior you're seeing. And you have to be very clear of the impact that behavior is having on other people. And then you have to say, what do we need to do to help you show up differently in your behavior to get the result you want? And I think you have to start again with even a senior leader believing that he or she wants to be successful, and they're just not seeing what they're doing. Now, accountability is also, if this person chooses not to change, then the reality is this person is saying, I don't really fit here. And that's a whole different conversation, right? But you cannot let your most senior people off the hook, because the minute you allow behavior that is not acceptable to the organization, you send a message to everybody else that behavior is okay, and it will kill your organization.
Thanks so much for that.
Talk, brilliant people who are toxic are not okay to keep in an organization. They have to change, or they'll have to find someplace else to work.
Thanks. Now, let's go to the next question. And this question is, have you experienced that human-centered leadership is often mentally and emotionally draining? What do you both think about that? Because Gustina, do you have some initial thoughts?
My initial thought is that human-centered leadership is actually the opposite of being mentally and emotionally draining. I mean, to me, I've seen and I've worked with some great leaders who, I mean, their leadership style isn't the top-down approach, it's the team-centered approach. So where they bring in their team and they said, hey, we need to make some changes. We need to make changes that are centered around XYZ, and then the team works together to decide how those changes should be implemented. And so that's more of getting, the buy-in of the team, as well as exemplifying a, leadership style that wants to make sure you're not just, targeting meeting metrics. So.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, what I read in this question is a person experiencing empathy or compassion fatigue, and that is a real thing.
Mm-hmm.
But being a human-centered leader doesn't mean that you need to put yourself in that position. The number one thing and a sort of response to that is to make sure that you're taking care of your own nervous system. There's a lot of science that helps us understand that when we are out of balance in our nervous system, as stress is sort of driving us, then it can emotionally drain us. So it's okay to, as a human-centered leader, to be like, I understand that this is happening, and I need to take care of myself first, so in the whole notion of on an airplane, you got to put your oxygen mask on first. I think it's okay to say that and say, let me take care of something and I'll come right back to address this. Because if you can't take care of yourself, then you can't take care of the people around you. And so if whoever um, wrote this question, I've got some additional resources that we might be able to support you in that as well. But if you find that you are a natural empath, then you could find that being a human-centered leader could be drawing too much on your nervous system. And there's some things that you can do about that.
Yeah, and let me add one more thing to it, because I'm going to read into it a little bit. I totally agree with what you say about managing your boundaries. Human-centered leadership, heart-centered leadership does not also mean that people get to be dramatic and crazy making and emotional in the workplace. That is not accountable behavior either, right? So again, it's about boundaries. It's, Gustina said the perfect thing. It's about people working together to be their best selves and supporting each other to be their best selves.
Great
Crazy,
addition.
crazy making is not part of that description.
Yeah, and I think in addition, and I think this is what you're saying, is like it's also not giving everybody a pass for everything.
Mm-mm, mm-mm.
And I think that that's often confused, especially in a lot of educators I work with. When we talk about being a human-centered educator, it makes people think that you have to give everybody deadline extensions and this and that, right? Like there's a
No,
balance in that.
no.
Okay, the next question is, with new technologies emerging, most of the changes happening in organizations make employees agitated, which impact work contribution. How can human-centered leadership help?
So I'll take a crack at that. I think managing the human side of change is that one of the most important things that heart-centered leaders do. Um, Managing the human side of change, we are constantly bombarded by change in our lives, and that change is just going to accelerate. Technology has accelerated the time of change. It has shrunk the globe, so we hear about every disaster that happens in every corner of the globe. And managing all of that change takes real skill. I can't even tell you how many change management programs I've gone through to get better at this, right? And it's a real skill. And so if you don't know the stages of change management, if you don't know how to recognize which people are in what stage, if you don't have the skill set to help people move from one stage to the other, please go get some skills, because you cannot be a leader in today's world. You can't be a coach in today's world. You can't even be a parent in today's world, to me, without knowing how to help people move through change. It's a critical competency.
And I'll connect a dot back here to what Gustina's talked about in the beginning about the sort of importance of communication. This is really a key, concept in any kind of human-centered change management, is that keeping secrets doesn't help people, right? Like that's where people get agitated. So the more that you can emphasize, the better. I like Dr. Becky Kennedy. She's a parenting expert, but her work is proving to be really valuable in the workplace as well. And one of the things that she recommends is to say, like, this is hard. And we don't know what the outcome is going to be, but just that admitting and that sort of honesty and empathy practice also really helps people. All right, so the last question, and then we're going to wrap up for the day, is what will you consider to be a noteworthy long-term benefit of human-centered leadership? / what's your North Star that keeps you going? So final question response for both of you, Gustina and Shaunna.
Gustina, you go first and then I'll answer.
So a noteworthy long-term benefit of human-centered leadership, I think it goes back to the relational aspect, and building those relationships that go beyond a particular job position or job title. I think that's something that helps to keep me going, because I mean, as I look back through the years and different positions and different companies I've worked for, it's always been the people that have had the most impact on me long term. So I think that's one of the great benefits.
Yeah, I agree. It's the long-term relationships I've built with people that are still part of my life, who still reach out, who still, I'm still connected to. I mean, those kind of relationships don't end because you move on to a different job. And the second thing I really love is that I've nurtured a lot of heart-centered leaders. And like I said, we were the worst factory in Texas Instruments. Those people were quote unquote losers. I got to watch 10 and 15 years later, those leaders step into VP positions and SVP positions in Texas Instruments and get to replicate human-centered leadership in their organizations. And some of them are still VPs at TI. And to me, proof is in the pudding. TI wanted to replicate what they were doing in other organizations across the company because it worked.
In closing, again, I want to thank the sponsors here, Dana Spires. Dana's here. Thanks for sharing your camera with us all day. And Monica Lawrence from Bossier Parish Community College. We have another panel in the series coming up on March 5th. And this one's going to be at 1 p.m. Central Time. And we've got Brianna Doucette and Lisa DeMore. And they're going to be talking about culturally intelligent communication with us, which is something that I've written and published about quite a bit. I also want to share with you this Leadership Essentials course. So Shaunna mentioned in her explanation several different kinds of leadership. And this course is a great overview of what are all the different kinds of leadership. And then it has 4 modules. And then the final module ends with inclusive leadership, which human-centered leadership is one of the components of that inclusive leadership. So I encourage you to check it out. And I'll send this as a link in the follow-up email to each of you as well. And I am so excited to say I wrote a book and it's published this week. And it's called Magic Mirror, 9 Practices to Be a Better Leader, Colleague, Educator, Neighbor, Friend, and More. And then there's a companion workbook that is a reflective journey through the Positionality Prism's 9 practices. And I think it's a beautiful companion to our conversation today, because in order to be an effective leader, we have to know ourselves. And this is a great way to help you begin to understand yourselves. It's written as a modern fable, so it's a fun story, a sort of fantastical journey of discovery that I encourage you to check out. It's at magicmirrorbook.com, and I encourage you to check that out. Now, I'm going to come back a slide here to your takeaways, because I want to see if anybody contributed. Oh, we don't have any contributions yet. I'm going to leave this up. But I also want to encourage you to leave feedback for us. So if you are curious about more opportunities that we offer, you can join my mailing list at engineerinclusion.com. Also, I'll drop a link into the chat at engineerinclusion.com/thanks. You can request a certificate of participation. And again, I just want to thank all of you for coming. Shaunna and Gustina, sort of last thoughts. If you want to share a way to be in contact with you, you're welcome to do that.
Yeah, you can find me at Shaunna Black on LinkedIn, and spelled Shaunna. That's the only one with 2 N's in it. You can find me, and I'd love to be connected to you. And I talk about heart-centered leadership a lot.
Thanks so much, Shaunna. Gustina?
Yes, and I can also be contacted through LinkedIn, under Gustina Collins-Hawkins. So I frequently check my messages, so easy to find.
You can also find me at shaunablack.com.
Yes, and Shaunna has a consulting service if that's of value to anyone of you looking to build your heart-centered leadership as well. Again, thank you so much for joining us, and we will see you on March 5th for the next conversation on culturally intelligent communication. Have a great day.
And go out and love your people.
Thank you. This was great. Have a very good
Thanks, Mary.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Learned a lot today. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.